The invention and innovation of the Maulvi, a discussion on the invention of the Muslim clergy, Muslim papacy, and Sayyid Brahmins within the sub-Indo continent context. Have you ever wondered where the concept of the Maulvi actually came from? Why is the concept of a Maulvi only relevant to Central Asians, sub-Indo continent, and Turkish peoples? Why isn't it prevalent amongst Africans and Arabs? Well, the actual literal translation for Maulvi or Molwa or Mola means Lord in Arabic, and we see that the term is used differently in Persian, Turkic communities and within the Indo subcontinent. We see that it could mean someone who has graduated from a madrasa or even someone who simply works at a mosque. The interesting thing is that the term has been used loosely throughout the past many centuries and by different cultures to describe many different people, none of which actually exist or have any credence in the Muslim faith. However, they have found a way to integrate their position within the Muslim faith. Now, I'm going to narrow the focus of the term Maulvi and the invention of the Muslim clergy to the Indo subcontinent context. The interesting thing is, the invention of the Maulvi within the Indian context has actually a lot to do with the Hindu religion. You see, the first interactions of the early Muslims who came into India interacted with a very sophisticated religious Brahmin elite. Now, this Brahmin elite actually did manage the affairs of the Hindu religion for the majority of Hindu peoples. They acted like a type of clergy, a papacy of sorts, where they actually managed the rituals for birth and death and weddings and satyas and pretty much everything that occurs in a person's daily life, including astrology, giving names to children, marital ceremonies, ceremonies of death, and so on were conducted by this priestly class. And so this was something new that the Muslims encountered because it's not something that they had been taught or exposed to within their own faith. Now, the interesting thing is, around this time, the majority of these religious peoples who had a lot of advanced knowledge in spiritual matters had to earn a living, and they primarily earned their living through working in the Muslim Waqf system or some sort of patronage by their king or feudal lord. But there wasn't really a profession of a Maulvi where he could charge for services from the general public. This never really existed in the Muslim context. In fact, Muslims were actually taught that you should have enough basic knowledge such that you don't need a clergy or a papacy or a Brahmin Pandit to really do anything for you. I mean, in this religion, the actual reality was, during the Prophet's time, that the common layperson would have enough basic knowledge to perform their day-to-day function. There was no obsessive need to study advanced subjects that are taught in madrasas. In fact, those subjects were considered frankly useless for your day-to-day life, and there was no madrasa during the time of the Prophet. The fancy inner sciences were considered to be something that wasn't relevant for the general population. However, important things like the ability to lead prayer for a funeral, for instance, a son leading the funeral prayers for his father, or the ability for the father to marry off his daughter, were considered much more tangible and pragmatic Muslim skills than what is being taught today. In spite of all that, and in spite of early Islam's insistence that scholarship be relegated to the actual pursuit of sciences and not be promoted in the form of a special clergy or papacy, we still see that this phenomenon take off, and especially take off in the Indo subcontinent. Now, as I mentioned, once the early Muslims started interacting with the sophisticated Brahmin class, they realized that they actually were outdone in the sense of a profession. There was no special spaces for these underemployed religious personalities. And so that's when we start to see that there becomes an establishment of madrasas and schools and, mosques that are attached to schools and different types of institutions that actually functioned as businesses that paid these underemployed Maulanas a salary for their services. Now, this doesn't really seem bad at first. It seems actually quite organized and, certainly people should earn a living. But what it really quickly morphs into is a sophisticated organization of patronage and oligarchy and, in other words, a Muslim papacy within the Indo subcontinent itself. Traditionally, this papacy during the medieval times aligned themselves with the local rulers and kings, whether they were Hindu or Muslim or otherwise, and earned their livelihood through the endowments that were given to them, large estate endowments. And they typically performed various rituals for the Muslim population and collected money for that. So it became quite a lucrative and important profession within the Indian Muslim context. As time went on, and the Muslims of India became more and more lay and reliant on Maulvis, the Maulvis were actually able to stretch their tentacles deeper into the everyday life of the average Muslim, such that they eventually became an integral part of sub-Indo-continental politics. We see this relevant in the medieval and early colonial period, and even relevant today, that within Muslim politics or Indian politics or Pakistani politics, the reality is there are religious parties now represented by mullahs. Their mullahs always seem to find a way to integrate what they think to be the most important issues at hand, and use religion to scare and incite division in a society to actually throw politics in a certain direction. And we've seen this time and time again throughout Indo-subcontinental Muslim politics. It occurred with multiple Mughal kings. It's occurred resulting in multiple civil wars. You saw mullahs pro-British, anti-British. You've seen mullahs pro-Indian and anti-Indian as well. Ultimately, what the mullahs have created over 400 or 500 years is a very sophisticated group of mosques and mega mosques and madrasas that communicate with each other and act in political proxy for whichever power broker is willing to offer them the best deal. Previously, those deals were in the forms of endowments, and today it's in the forms of employment or political status or political favors. Funny enough, the Maulanas actually don't seem to like to talk about this subject. You will never see any conversation amongst the ulema about their reality as a papacy. Most often, they will never challenge other ulema, even if they're on the other side of the fence, because they don't want to shake the ground of the papacy. I've always found it funny that how very clearly a group of ulema can be aligned with someone that is totally anti-Muslim and working towards a genocide of Muslims. Meanwhile, their collegial ulema will never challenge that ulema for doing what they do. It seems to be one of the biggest hush subjects. It's like they're kind of all in it together. It just proves that mosques, madrasas, actually don't function for any spiritual purpose at all today. They actually do function as political proxy places where votes are gathered and political favors are won. It's quite sad that this has become the function of the Maulvi, but it's also a harsh reality of how unsophisticated Muslim institutions have become. Similarly, Muslim institutions seem to have totally differing opinions on very important subjects. For instance, the Jamaatul Hind, this is their coat of arms in India, actually supports Modi's aggression in Kashmir and supports that Kashmir belongs to India, and that's the end of it. They actually don't really care about the voice of the Kashmiris and have consistently throughout history, including during British times, sided with whoever had the greatest power in the country. And in fact, they were quite anti-Pakistan movement and actually called all the founding fathers of Pakistan at one point Kafirs. And this is a leading Islamic institution in India that produces hundreds and hundreds of Maulanas every year. And that same institution has trained and exported hundreds of Maulanas in other countries, especially in the West, who carry this idea that it is okay to be a political proxy agent and spend countless hours and time devoting their time and their church's time or mosque's time working with political angles and not really focusing on spirituality. Unfortunately, this has led to a crisis of faith in many Muslim communities, but has also led to some really divisive politics. You find that the majority of extremism that was built in the Middle East and in Afghanistan and in particular in Western countries actually incubated from mosques that were politically oriented. But that's not the only way the invention of the Maulana has innovated itself time and time again. Today, in the more modern context, we see that the Maulana has become quite the entrepreneurial scholar. And unlike early Islam, where the Prophet actually tried to teach and encourage the general population to learn their basic Islamic foundations and to practice them independently, we still see a continuous trend in Islamic personalities and Muslim personalities trying to teach and sell advanced subjects which frankly have no bearing on your day-to-day life and actually only complicate your understanding of religion. The biggest personalities who have done this and have opened the door to this are the people that we actually revere the most, such as Hamza Yusuf. With all his exhibitions and speeches and meetings, he's actually opened the floodgates to this type of Maulana business. Similarly, we see the same effect coming from folks like Dr. Omar Abdullah, who, although very knowledgeable and scientific and respectable, have actually created this neo-culture of sage Maulanas who go around and, people pay to sit with them and pay to listen to them for advanced subjects that frankly don't help you in your day-to-day life. In my opinion, no one is free from the sin of greed, and Maulanas are not. We as consumers have to know what we're consuming and what we're paying for. Once again, in Islam, there is no papacy, there is no Brahmanate. You don't have to pay for your sins to be saved. And knowledge that you need is available to you for free. We need to realize that the consumers are the main cause of feeding the beast. Most cultures today have become benign in their religiosity, primarily due to the behaviors of their clergy and papacy. We see that Christians and Jews and Hindus alike have, for the most part, departed from their churches primarily due to the misconduct of their church leaders. Is it high time that Muslims also adopt a benign attitude, especially towards Maulanas? I think it is. I think the greed has reached to a tipping point where the ordinary lives of Muslims are so interfered and meddled with that if you don't leave them now, they will destroy your societies. While what I'm saying might seem quite dramatic, can't we learn from the examples of what's happening in the Muslim world? The majority of the conflict you will find Maulana proxy on both sides. You'll see them in the conflicts of Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, most of Africa. There are Muslim proxies everywhere claiming that the other side is not Muslim. This very personality on one side argued that the Muslims need to be politically active and vocal in the North American context, and later condemned the Syrians for doing that very thing, which resulted into a nasty civil war. And later has decided that it is a good decision for the Saudis and the UAE peoples to become cooperative with Israel. My question is, well, this is exactly what the Arab societies were doing in the 60s and the 70s. They were highly secular and diplomatic and pragmatic. They had made multiple relations and attempts to unionize the Arabic countries and do away with religious singularity. However, it was the very Maulana creed that created the separatists and divisions within the Muslim communities, the very people that people like him represent. Maybe it's just me, but when I look at these neo-class of Maulvis, I see them for what they are: opportunists, selling people from one side to the other, maintaining their hegemony and power over a very unevolved group of people who will do their best to prevent secularization and modernization of a people. They will do whatever they can to keep Muslims focused on irrelevant subjects such that they can continue to manage and sell your day-to-day lives and affairs to the important power brokers of today. This has been my discussion. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.